Lovely. Right. Hello, everyone. If it's okay with you, we're just going to hang on a minute or so to let some more people in. We have got quite a high volume of pre-registrations tonight, so we're going to just make sure everyone can tear themselves away from BBC News tonight and come and join us. We appreciate that everybody's attention might be slightly diverted tonight. So if you're spending some time with us, we really appreciate it, and it's lovely to have you. Okay. Kate, do you think we're good to go on the numbers?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. Right. Hello, everyone, again. Welcome to Stowe Talks. Oh, there I am. That's me, Sarah Barr-Young, Managing Partner of Stowe Family Law. I've also got Jake with me tonight, who's a solicitor in my team in Leeds. Jake deals with difficult divorces, I think it's fair to say, complex children matters, but also cases that involve domestic violence, which is why he's here with us tonight. And also we have Tom. Tom Nash is one of my favourite webinar guests. You might know him as Mr. Divorce Coach. You'll definitely recognise the yellow chair, which is his I suppose, logo. And you might have seen him on his own podcast or other webinars, and you'll definitely have seen him with us before. Now, Tom is an experienced divorce and separation coach. He's gone from strength to strength in the time that I've known him, that's for certain. And I think his success is down to his, I'd say, unique approach. Now, Tom draws on his own experiences from being a child of divorce, a divorcee himself, and now stepfather. Those are the experiences that make him pretty enlightened, I'd say. He's got his own podcast. He's got a busy divorce coach practice as well. He's got a long list of credentials. I won't list them here. But in brief, there just aren't many male divorce coaches in the UK. But for me, Tom continues to be the one I recommend to my clients. He provides one-to-one coaching, but also uncoupling coaching, which you may have heard of, and also coaching for co-parenting and also blended families. To give you a flavour of his other work, a previous topic for us was co-parenting, planning and boundaries. Now that was a really good session, really well attended and really informative. I'm minded to see if I can bribe him to do it again in the next few months, if that's possible. Now, if you've been to us before, you'll know that the beauty of Stowe Talks is that our listeners drive our content. So you're the people who tell us what to cover, essentially. I feel personally that tonight's session has been fairly, well, it's long overdue. I feel that it's just the start of us covering this topic in detail. And it's a difficult topic. If you've registered for this webinar, it's because you have an interest in the subject of male domestic abuse. Now, whether that's as a victim, as a survivor, a family member of a victim, or perhaps a counsellor, maybe a lawyer who's looking to learn more, or even a student, perhaps a law student, you're welcome in whatever capacity you're here in. It's great to have people attending webinars on subjects like this, and I just hope they grow and grow. I'd like to mention also that it's a difficult topic for us as lawyers. Any case with domestic violence in it is difficult for family lawyers. We are above and beyond very human, and that's why we do this area of law. And with male victims, the available support is not so obvious. Now, from research that's available out there, we know that 1 in 3 victims of domestic abuse are male, but only tiny percentage of those, it's 4.4%, of people who are being supported by local domestic abuse services are male. Okay, you may have heard of the Mankind Initiative, and that's something we might talk about with Tom a little bit later. I know that he's going to signpost us with the information there, but Mankind Initiative, they help men escape from domestic abuse, and they are the source for many of the national statistics in this area. And if you get a chance, please check out their website. Mankind runs a helpline, and they say that 61% of men who call them have never spoken to anyone before about the abuse that they're suffering. So that's 61% of their callers have never spoken to a family member or a friend or another helpline before they call Mankind. Okay. The helpline that Mankind run is a confidential helpline. We have to spread awareness that these things exist. To put things in perspective, Mankind Initiative Helpline, well, it needs more support. It's only open between 10 and 4 on weekdays, and they can't provide support by email. Now, if we contrast that to the Women's Aid website, for example, they have a live chat function on their website, and that's available 7 days a week. Okay. These are obviously available resources and places for support. I'm going to say it again before the end of the session. I know I will, but I'll say it now. If anybody is in danger, you call 999. That's your first stop. Okay. Tom's going to be giving us some more signposting in his presentation. But ultimately, tonight's conversation is one that we're just really starting. We need to have more of it. Half of the male victims of domestic abuse, they don't tell anyone that they're a victim. They're 2.5 times less likely to tell anyone compared to female victims. So these statistics are particularly sobering, aren't they? Now, Tom's going to expand on this along with some practical steps to take for victims, even when you can't think straight, and also practical steps to help other people if you think that they're victims. Okay. Like I say, it's a massive topic. It may open doors to another session, but let us know what you think. We've talked about this sort of thing before, but just because a marriage or a relationship ends and a victim manages to escape an abusive relationship, it doesn't necessarily mean abuse stops automatically. Often, if there are children, you have to co-parent with an ex, and that's definitely something we've covered in the past on this webinar, but I'm just thinking perhaps that in the future we may do a specific session just for dads in this situation, how to co-parent when there's been obviously an abusive relationship. Thank you for listening to me tonight to do the introduction. The format is fairly straightforward. What we're going to do is obviously Tom's presentation, and then we're going to do questions. Firstly, I've got some very brief housekeeping matters. You'll have been forewarned that tonight's session is recorded. We can ask questions and interact. For questions, please use the Q&A function, which is at the top of your screen. We have got the chat function enabled, obviously, as well. This is a safe space for people to listen and ask questions. So obviously, be polite on the chat. I know you will be. And when you get a moment, give us some feedback. These webinars, as I say, are driven by the people who listen to them and attend them. So let us know what you want to hear about. We are first and foremost lawyers, not broadcasters. We are getting better, I like to think, but if we're a little rough around the edges, then please forgive us, obviously. I'll now hand over to Tom, who is much more experienced in this than I am, and it's a delight to have you back. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that. I was going to caveat that myself with I'm a much better coach than I am a public speaker, but we'll see how that goes. No, thank you very much for everyone for joining us here today, and thank you for the very, very kind introduction, Sarah. One of the first slides, we've got a few things to go through, just to share some information, some insights, hopefully answer some questions beforehand for you, but please do save them for the end as well. What I really want to start with is in terms of types of domestic abuse. So it's not always domestic violence or isn't always physical. So those are the core forms of types of domestic abuse. So sexual abuse, rape, unwanted sexual activity, sexual manipulation, etc. Physical, of course, because for a lot of people it isn't always physical, but for a lot of people it is. So any kind of physical contact that causes harm, that is unwarranted, it doesn't have to be as obvious as it would be portrayed, potentially in a mainstream media channel, etc. But it can be quite slight and quite light, but it also can also be very, very severe. The other forms is things like psychological abuse, so embarrassing, threatening behaviours, gaslighting, as an example, which is to actually convince the victim of their own thoughts and to actually challenge that and to make them believe and take on the aggressor's opinions and beliefs. through to manipulation, psychological hurt, weaken and control the individual. Psychological and emotional domestic abuse has some overlaps and very closely tied, things through to like the emotional, actual, the feeling of it as opposed to the thinking of it. So psychological is about the thinking of it and experience of it, whereas emotional is the feeling of it in terms of being humiliated, criticized, brought down, always the butt of the joke, etc., being degraded emotionally. That can again link quite very closely to verbal abuse, verbal degraded, being verbally degraded or demeaned, bullied, frightened and intimidated. Underneath all of them there is financial. Now largely for the vast majority of other forms of domestic abuse, you'll typically always find a level of financial abuse or control. So what does financial abuse look like? Well, it is having full control of income. So someone who holds all the accounts, the assets, properties, cars, anything of value. But also on the equal side, it would actually usually be that actually if someone's controlling all the finances, and that doesn't necessarily come across in a negative way, that might be a case of, it's okay, darling, I can look after all of that. That you don't need to worry about all that. I can take care of that. But at the same time, all of the debt and liability is placed onto you. You may find that financial control usually typically comes with someone who maybe doesn't have their own accounts, or if they do, it's controlled by their partner or the abuser. Maybe just giving pocket money or housekeeping, etc. So those are different types of domestic abuse. And for different people, there's an experience of different forms and different levels. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's all of them or two of them or maybe one of them. We're also here talking today about male victims of domestic abuse. So I'm going to point out some common themes, but just to point out that any form of domestic abuse, abuse doesn't recognize gender, it doesn't recognize age, it doesn't recognize where you live in the country, what your religious beliefs are, etc. Abuse can affect anyone, anywhere, at any time. So I've mentioned some of the stats and the facts here for male domestic abuse victims. So as you mentioned, 2.5, so just under 3 times less likely to tell anyone ever. That's and with the stats there from Mankind as well. I've got the sources for the dates here as well. I can share them with you all if you'd be interested. But yes, men are 3 times less likely, just under 3 times less likely to tell anyone ever. And whilst 1 in 3 victims of domestic abuse are male, we have to caveat that with the fact of that is as reported. So the true stats, unfortunately, aren't available. They are also 50% less likely to actually report that to police, court intervention, support services, etc., as we just heard. Men are also 80% more likely to commit suicide than women are. There's so many scary stats out there around suicide within men. It is the #1 killer of men in the UK under 45. And with stats from the Office of National Statistics, that averages at just over 18 men per day, 18 people per day. We've got 47 participants here that I can see, and we've got several presenters here as well. Now, if you break that down as an average, there's going to be people potentially in this group, and you think about 18 people per day. It's a huge, scary number and way too high. Okay. Like I said, I talk about common themes. Whilst abuse doesn't recognize or discriminate against any gender, etc., or any other parameter, there are still some slight common themes. So women are, our female counterparts are statistically and highly statistically more likely to be exposed to experiences of physical or sexual abuse than men are. That's not to say it doesn't happen. It's just a truth of statistic. Men, however, are more likely to be victims of psychological, emotional, or verbal abuse. The financial abuse is actually on an even keel. As I said earlier, it underpins quite common theme of financial control and financial abuse. So if we're thinking that obviously men are more prominently, more likely to be exposed to a psychological, emotional, or verbal abuse, but of course are less likely to report and are sitting within that field of only 1/3, there's a huge area of focus here in terms of psychological, emotional, and verbal abuse awareness. There's a number of challenges. As Sarah mentioned, we could definitely do some more, some follow-up sessions to this. The list will continue to grow, and actually, by all means, in terms of feedback, if there are others that people would like to contribute with, that would be very, very valuable for me to share with other people as well in the future. But just to highlight some kind of key themes here, stigmas and stereotyping. That's a very common theme that runs through an experience for a male victim of any form of domestic abuse. Is being stigmatized, or fear of stigmatized, or being stereotyped, how things are publicized or seen, that external factor of what people will believe or won't believe. That comes obviously from things like fear and shame and guilt, so the emotional side of things, and those worries and concerns, fears of not being believed, the shame or the guilt that they feel that actually this is their fault, or that this is of their own making, or fears and shames again with the stigma, again, that they won't be believed externally. Other challenges, if you are experiencing this, or if you're noticing this in someone, a loved one or a colleague or a peer, in terms of low self-esteem and self-belief or confidence. Now, they're all slightly different. Confidence is around our faith and belief of an ability to do something, feeling confident about it, whereas self-esteem is about our self-value, our self-worth. So if we're feeling stigmatized and scared and feared and shamed and our low self-esteem, again, these are all big challenges for all abuse victims, male and female. A wider challenge, particularly with men as well, is in terms of their support network. Who is their support network? And how connected they are. Again, male or female, if a victim has been gaslighted and has been isolated from friends and family, their support network might be part of that fear, that they actually don't feel that they have the opportunity to find that support network or identify it. Societal views as well, that links back to the stigmas and stereotyping, how people see things, how society views men in relationships or men in general. And again, that can create a self-perpetuating stigma, or a self-reflecting fear as well, that isn't necessarily true. From experience with clients, I know that there is a huge challenge around cultural and community impacts that can be a big challenge for men as well. In particular areas of cultural and community impacts can cause a severe restriction or a feeling of restriction for them, and not really knowing where to turn. Big one there, kind of in the middle, unconscious bias, a word that's come around quite a lot in the last few years, around things like not being believed. There's several articles out there that have been used over the years across mainstream media, BBC, etc., of male domestic abuse victims speaking out about the fear of unconscious bias, but also how that actually has come out in practice in years gone by, that support services or police have not believed them. Now, things are changing for the better, which is fantastic, and it's taken for some very brave people to step out there and share their stories for that to shift. But this is still a fear and a challenge and an issue that a lot of men face, that they feel that there is going to be an unconscious bias. There isn't. The police will treat you in exactly the same way. Okay. Lack of resources or knowledge. Again, that it's not necessarily shared and has been previously vocalized on a level playing field, as it were, I suppose, that people aren't aware of those resources, aren't aware of what knowledge and support mechanisms are out there, and feel that it's something that they have to live with. So this can be a huge challenge for men. The previous imbalance of support. again, the statistic that Sarah's using a moment ago, and giving examples of the support resources, things like Mankind, fantastic resource in terms of comparisons to Women's Aid, for example. So there is, unfortunately, like I say, the landscape is shifting, but there is still at this moment, unfortunately, an imbalance of support for things like refuge, safe haven, where a man can go when he is fearing for safety. Obviously, he can go to the police, but in terms of a refuge location to go to, there is still far too few. In previous years, with other imbalances, things like rail to refuge, rail brought in a thing a number of years ago, where a female, with their children or not, could attend to any network rail station and ask for safe passage due to escaping abuse. I believe they're in the process of changing it, or possibly already have changed it, but until very recently, it still hadn't changed to my knowledge. Again, the imbalance of charities, it's actually going to be a point I'm going to come back to later on in terms of signposting and things that we can all do, because there is still an imbalance, and it's about creating equality in that support service as well. And things like they mentioned there, Annie, Ask for Annie. Again, that was something that came up a few years ago in terms of being able to go to where a woman could go into a Boots or a pharmacy, etc. That has now been extended, as far as I've been informed, as far as I'm aware. But previously, we have seen imbalances of support. We still need to do a lot more work to create a better even keel. Some of the other challenges there, language, really, really important one. Things like the stronger sex, man up, not being a real man, boys don't cry, all those connotations that I don't sign up to. But that type of language pattern and exposure to it can create and perpetuate those fears and those experiences that actually they're supposed to be stronger, so they should be able to deal with this, or they should be able to work through this, or just deal with it in manner. That's completely the wrong language to be using. So that can be a real impact and barrier for a lot of men when we're still hearing these types of sentences and phrases used online, offline, everywhere. Professional and career impacts. Now, that is one that, again, from client experience, it has become quite prominent. I've had a client who worked within emergency services role, where actually his biggest fear was around how it would impact his work and his career, therefore his ability to support himself, create a safe haven, etc. So again, fears and concerns over professional and career impacts. Again, I'm going to talk a little bit later in terms of signposting and what we can do to change that. Financial restrictions, again, both male and female, there is an experience of financial abuse, financial control, that fear over financial restrictions, their actual physical ability to do something and to take that first step. Some other ones there, false allegations as well. This comes up very prominently, that they are the abuser, that they have a particular personality trait. I think my speaker's just gone, apologies. Find my headphones and reconnect to something else. Apologies, 2 moments. It's my headphones that have jumped out. Perfect. Right, there we go. False allegations, that can be a big challenge for a lot of men, where an allegation or potentially threats of an allegation and alienating tactics, threats there as well, can be a huge challenge. If you do ABC, I'll do this, or I won't do this, I will restrict this. So again, huge potential challenges and issues that face a lot of men. In terms of kind of signs and red flags that we can start to become more aware of within the individual, and certain traits, again, based on the personality of the person and how well you know them. If someone has previously been quite the life and soul of the party, or been quite a vibrant, happy person, but now they're become a former shell of themselves, quiet, timid, withdrawn, distracted, distant, all those types of things, change in that actual presence of their behavior is a very obvious sign. Another one's like going along with the partner's decisions, always, to save face, to save the experience of the repercussions, even when you know it's something that they wouldn't normally go along with. If this is you watching this and you feel that you might be in this experience, if you're starting to notice those patterns there, that actually you're always going along with those decisions, not necessarily just to be a pleaser and to please your partner, but also for fear of ramifications and what the repercussions might be. Self-blame as well, very common one in all forms of domestic abuse. It's my fault. I made them do it. I made them do that thing, take that step, behave in that way. Okay. That justification, that actually links very closely to things like trauma bonds and loyalty binds as well, where actually it becomes a protection for the abuser. Emotional distress signals or emotional regulation, where actually that has shifted. So if you're seeing a difference in how they're managing their emotions and excuse me, being hyper vigilant to situations with their emotional distress signals, again, that can be quite a big sign. Low self-esteem, like we mentioned before, in terms of their own self-value, their own self-worth, that's been dropping or has dropped. And abnormal or unhealthy attachment bonds, as we just kind of mentioned. Things like two down from that, the constant checking, constantly having to report, to the extent of when actually it becomes things like I'm saying with my mate at the golf club or wherever it is, and having to being requested that you have to send a picture, things like that, that the extent of that behavior of control, of a constant check-in, and that abnormal attachment bond. Dependencies or codependencies where there haven't been them before in particular, but where that dependency is changing as well, and you're starting to see a shift in that former shell of that person. So all of these are around where you're seeing shifts and changes, and it won't necessarily be all, and it won't necessarily just be one. It can potentially be a combination of a variety. Things like being always unwell, to get themselves withdrawn from particular social situations. So this links to the social withdrawal, trying to shift away from family events, or always unwell in terms of getting away from work and things like that, or even giving up work when someone formerly loved their career or was really good at what they did. All linking things like their loss of identity. This is a big area for a lot of men, even outside of domestic abuse that I work with, going through the divorce or separation, struggling to reconnect with who they are and find that identity. Again, just inside, but also outside of domestic abuse for men, it's actually men where our physiological shifts change more than women for a divorce or separation, in terms of things like weight gain or loss, change in appearance, and again, that can be quite a key sign and indicator to someone who may be experiencing or being a victim of domestic abuse. Degrading self-talk, a bit like that self-blame, but actually starting to really vocalize not just that it was my fault, but then actually starting to put themselves down. They're now taking on the abuser's words, and have started to change how they talk about themselves. Again, even then started to even push further down that level of self-esteem, that self-value. I mentioned already there about regression, isolation, family and friends, that kind of overall social withdrawal, and a change in contact patterns. So social withdrawal might not be that they necessarily completely withdraw, but actually if you've got someone who used to be very active in, let's say, the friend or work WhatsApp group, and that has deteriorated, or someone's always answering their phone, or there could be a number of different ways in terms of how their contact pattern changes as well. As particularly maybe if you're the parent of someone that you're concerned about, and they would always call you on a Tuesday afternoon, and that starts to change, and they're busy, but you start to recognize actually it's because they're not allowed to. Victims of domestic abuse, again, this isn't gender-based, both men and women are always very anxious to please the partner. Again, I think we kind of point out pretty obvious why there's things like the attachment trauma bonds, or loyalty binds, or fears of the repercussions. Changing work behaviours, much like their social interactions. Has there been a big change in the work behaviours, or even the quality of their work and productivity, which can be quite a big sign to notice for as well. Children that have turned against them, and then some other real obvious things here: intoxication and substance abuse, form of escapism. How has their relationship with having a beer or glass of wine in the evening or the weekend or anything like that changed, etc. What's the indicator there? What it's saying to you? And then some really other things like the panic and anxiety attacks, and again they can try to change behavioural based changes. Whilst we've been talking about, whilst we've been talking about signs to spot in potential victims and loved ones and friends and family, it's also equal to spot and notice traits within an abuser, and how they might be coming out. Okay, so core kind of abuser traits are things like gaslighting that I mentioned before, making you believe something other than you otherwise would, again making you believe that this is your fault, taking on the blame, isolation, so on and so forth, manipulating as well, manipulating behaviors. And again, if you think about manipulation in the context of all the different types of abuse, there is psychological manipulation, there's verbal manipulation, there's all different types of ways people manipulate, that abusers manipulate. Things like creating it as all your fault. It's putting, and in effect, forcing their feelings onto you, making it your fault. Okay, like we said, out of gaslighting. Abusers tend to use ultimatums as well. Ultimatums can be kind of inverse and converse, so it could be in a way of, if you leave, I'll do A, B, C. If I leave, you won't see the kids. If I leave, I'll hurt myself. Equally, it can be the other way around. If you stay, I'll change. If you stay, I'll do this. False promises within the ultimatums. Abusers pick fights consistently, and you have to think about, from an abuser's perspective for a moment, why they do that. What's their MO? What's their motive? And it's to degrade you, but it's also to give them back that power. Yes, the thing that abuser is always chasing is power and control. Okay. So humiliating as well, putting down in front of people, like I said earlier, making butt of the joke and things like that. It's a very common abuser trait when it's not a joke and it's not in good faith, and it is, we see, if you were talking to your children about it, it'd be a form of bullying. Okay. Guilt trips is a big one as well for abusers, in terms of how they make you do the things that they want to do, and making it the onus onto you. Again, so kind of all linking with things like manipulation, ultimatums. Bad temper, now that's different to a couple having an argument and apologizing afterwards, talking it through, making it up. This is around the rage, however that be verbal, psychological, physical, but the bad temper that comes out of them. You made me angry, you did this. Again, it's flipping it around and making it your fault. And all of these are intertwined and interconnected, by the way. Threats, as we've mentioned, again, that can fall in an ultimatum barrier, but it can also be physical threat, verbal threat, emotional threat. The controlling behavior, like we mentioned before, things like not being able to have access to accounts, your phone, etc., and very controlling, coercive behaviors. Forcing their feelings onto you, that's around, actually links to the one below, therefore making you subservient. Okay. So by projecting their feeling onto you and forcing their feelings onto you, it makes you the guilty party. Again, making you take all the onus and the weight of this. Hence why you hear regularly with victims of abusers that it was my fault, he or she didn't do it, or I made them do it. It's also very strict. They're also very strict in their way or the highway. There is very little room for compromise. Now, again, that doesn't necessarily come across always in a threatening manner. That could come across in a charming way. But again, you have to think about the context of it. It's still to ultimately have the power and get what they want, not include you as an equal, I should say. So what can you do? Now, these are relatively broad spectrum, so I'll touch on all of them for you. But again, this is for both the individual, but also if you are on the periphery looking in and witnessing this experience for a friend or loved one. The most obvious one, of course, leave if you stroke they can, and the key point here is safely. And come back to that at the very bottom, highlighted in yellow. But the key point is safely. Okay. Regular check-ins. Again, if you've got a break in regular contact patterns, or someone is becoming distant, along with a potential other series of signs and flags that you're noticing, being the one to be the regular check-in. Are you okay? Dependent on the severity and the ferocity of it, maybe potentially needing to create a safe word with your friend, with your loved one. The key thing, of course, is also to never give up. It's about creating a safe, supportive space, completely free of judgment or blame. Free of judgment or blame, very importantly, to either the victim or indeed the abuser. If you're thinking about the trauma loyalty bonds there, that the victim becomes very protective of the abuser. So keeping free of judgment for both the victim and the abuser is ultimately key. How do you create a safe space? Well, privacy, somewhere that they feel safe. It might be that they come to you. It might be that you meet in the park, so it's public space, whatever it might be for them. But it's about what's safe for the individual. Really listen and acknowledge. One of the key things here is really listening and acknowledging that. Is also not over-promising if you are the person in terms of trying to help and support. Not promising that it is all going to be okay, because you can't provide that to them. What you can provide them is knowledge, support, options and choices, and always being there. But one of the key things is about the acknowledgement within that actually this is real and this is true, this is happening. Whether they come to you or it's actually you going to them. Okay, so do take them seriously. Assurances, think about your language, as we mentioned earlier, about the way that you say things, but also what you're saying, how you're delivering it, what they need to hear as well. So they need to hear the blame or that I always thought he or she was that. Okay, get a bit into protection mode. So it's about the assurances and taking them seriously. Other things that an individual can do in terms of helping them to process securely. Again, this is all about safety here. Everyone's got an iPhone or tablet or whatever these days. Encouraging them to journal or keep a diary or speak to others if they don't want to write about something. Again, the key point here is safely. Live experience of a client in terms of how technology can either help or hinder. Where a family shared cloud had a very huge negative impact for them because everything was actually automatic. Every time they put something in their locked, password protected to authentication, it also automatically got shared to a shared family cloud. So technical safety as well as physical safety is really important here. Encouraging to speak to others, both for the individual, but also for you. It's one of the things I was going to talk about a little bit further down in terms of getting self-educated, going and finding out what are the resources and information you can acquire to help your friend, to help your loved one. Okay. Again, caveat of safety, documenting everything. Names, dates, times, places, witnesses, experiences. Again, safely keeping that document file safely located. Might be out of the home, might be whatever it might be, but you need to be able to keep a record of everything wherever possible. In fact, I'll kind of just move down a few dots there, a few bullet points in terms of support safe reporting. Okay, going to their GP, going to the police, getting reference numbers. These are areas of complete safety and 100% private and confidential. Getting reference numbers that go in with the document file. Okay. Because they may need these more than likely at some point at a later date. Something else that both as an individual or as the support friend or family can do is things like spare clothes, cash, access to a different account, a different phone, kept somewhere with someone safely should they ever need it at a moment's notice. And keeping that forward and getting that support resource. Within that, things like copies of key documentations, birth certificates, marriage certificates, driving license, car insurance, mortgage deed, things like that, very, very important ones. Okay, income protection insurance, whatever it might be, key important documents, and again, somewhere safe or with someone safe. The other thing here that's really, really key, both for the victim as well as for the support resource, is do not retaliate if you're the individual. And if you're the support resource, do not confront. You're putting the victim at higher risk of further exposure and greater extent of that abuse if you confront. Signposting, we're going to share some signposting in a little bit. But again, getting educated about other forms of signposting. And then the last point there, which linking back up to the top, if they can, or if you can leave safely, creating a safe exit strategy. When would be the best? And I mean finite, when would be the best time of day, best day of the week? Where would they go? Where's going to be the safest place? Where would the abuser not know they are? How can you help them? What do they need? Getting really fine at building a real plan and a safe strategy to allow them to escape in a safe place, in a safe way. So what else can be done outside of that? I mentioned it already, educating ourselves, particularly within all forms of abuse, and particularly also we're talking here about male victims of domestic abuse today, but educating ourselves. What are the resources? Where are they? What can we pull together if we're the person that's supporting someone? How can we share that with them? Educating ourselves in terms of things that we can and possibly shouldn't be saying, and how to approach this. We've talked about a lot of them already, but really getting just a little bit more knowledge and resource. The more knowledge you have as a support resource, the more help you can offer to your friend or loved one. Looking at this equally in inequality, as we've mentioned at the very, very start, one of the first stats, one in three domestic abuse victims are male, with the caveat of that's reported, so we don't have the necessary true figure, much as we don't have the exact figure of female abuse victims, because again, they don't all report. But we need to start shifting and looking at this in an equal value, and also looking at what forms of domestic abuse are equal as well, as we said at the start. Charity support, okay. We are all living in a cost of living crisis. Someone told me a joke today that there's only 4 prime ministers until Christmas. But there are many different forms of charity support. It doesn't have to be financial. Okay. So could you offer time, resources, clothing, whatever it might be, to a male domestic abuse charity? Contact a charity like Mankind and a couple of others that are going to mention. Ask them what resources would be helpful to them if you can't donate money. If you can, fantastic. But if you can't, and your purse is already stretched, what else can you do to help? Helping to normalise and bring more opportunities of support to other people that you don't know who are going through this experience. Workplace support as well. Employers and organisations have and focus a lot on the duty of care of their employees these days, which is absolutely fantastic to see. Is there any form of, or exploring with your friend or yourself, is there any form of workplace-based support, whether that be any kind of therapeutic counselling or coaching support, or any other type of support that might be within a workplace HR policy? What types of support can work offer? And again, knowing who to go to within the organisation, depending on the type of company you work for. Sharing and normalising, doing things like this today, helping normalise and share and talk about these experiences only helps to continue to widen the net of acceptance and realism, that people can come forward and people can start to talk and seek that support and those resources. And with that, of course, means not being silent as well. So if you see a post on mine or anybody else's social media that resonates with you, share it. That might just impact one person and might be the one thing that they need to see that day. So don't stay silent. Share the resources and share the knowledge. In terms of signposting, we've mentioned Mankind. The phone number, I think, is in the chat. Kate's already shared that, I think. There are a number of others, and there are ones growing all the time that are specific, things like Men's Advice Line as well. There's a very resourceful website called respect.uk.net. Didn't have a telephone number. I was looking to share one for you. You, of course, have ones like Samaritans there. Men's Aid. You can actually call Women's Aid as well. I've witnessed, and there's some articles out there recently where Women's Aid have also been supporting in any way that they can. Outside of specific domestic abuse charities, is looking at something for a potential option of something more local, of a men's support group, men's mental health support group. Whatever it might be for the individual. I've used an example there of one that is local to me, one that I sponsor with time and resources and some charity money raising for them, called For Men to Talk. Run by an individual who started it for his own reasons, but it is a safe, supportive, non-judgmental space where once every week, or I think once a week, they meet online, and then the alternative week they meet in person. Sometimes they go for a walk, sometimes they go for a coffee, whatever it might be, but looking at what local support resources there are. The key thing with the signposting, as I mentioned before, educate yourself as well. It's not just for the individual. This is also for you. Go and talk to Mankind, have a look at their website, look at these other ones, check out their resources, look at their FAQs, look for the responses for how you can work with things to support the loved one that you're concerned about. And of course, if they have the means and the ability to, in any way, shape or form, to seek any professional help, be that therapy, counselling or coaching or whatever vocation is their preference. And the last thing, as Sarah's already mentioned, if in danger, call 999, call the police. Only one slide about how I can help and the type of work that I do with clients in various different shapes and forms, but emotional support and well-being, someone to walk the path with them, hear them, acknowledge them, have them validated, and also someone that can give them some of that direct resource, knowledge, tips and help. Things like positive mindset techniques as well for increasing that self-esteem, that self-belief and that confidence. Various different ways of working with clients to help them overcome negative emotions, anger, sadness, fears, guilt and shame, so on and so forth. Like I mentioned, increasing confidence and self-esteem there. Helping them identify kind of best self-care practices as well. So maybe with a client who is in the process of working through their safe exit strategy, how can we help them become the best version of themselves, or their best self-care practices for their day-to-day living and care. Practical solutions based as well, in terms of their escape, their safe exit strategy, and various practical solutions, communication as well, communication patterns, helping them to understand triggers and patterns for them so they can self-preserve themselves whilst they may be still in this situation. And that comes through a variety of things, from core coaching competencies, NLP, CBT, timeline therapy and hypnotherapy. So that's all from me. There's a few bits of information there in terms of how you can contact me. I'm sure the amazing people at Stowe are going to share the slide deck with you afterwards. And I'll just leave it up there for a moment, and I'll pass back over to you, Sarah.
Wow, Tom, that was great. Thank you very much. Absolutely awesome, as always. Really informative. I've been making notes as we've been going along, some for myself and some for just a couple of things that I'm thinking that would be quite handy to kind of pick up on and share I know that Jake's going to have been making some notes as well, and we just got a couple of things perhaps that we just want to touch on. Being in obviously an abusive relationship or marriage and trying to focus on how you're going to get out is really hard, and it's really hard at the moment, regardless of gender, because you're wondering practically how it's actually going to happen. How are you going to get a lawyer? How are you going to get to speak to somebody? How long is it going to take? But one of the big worries is cost.
Yes.
Now, you may not feel you want to share, well, you may not recognize in the first place that you've been in an abusive relationship, but sharing those details of how uncomfortable you've been or what's happened to you is really important, because it could well open a door, and that's open a door to legal aid. Now, I'm not a legal aid practitioner, but it's really vital that you arm yourself when you get to that stage, because it could make the difference between somebody making the decision to proceed to get out and not getting out at all, because they may think they simply can't, because they can't afford it. You hear these horror stories as to how much it costs, etc. But as I say, the unfortunate situation of abuse means that it may actually mean that you can afford to get out, and it might be with legal aid. I'm not going to go into complexities tonight, but we can talk about it perhaps another time. My second big star on my notes really was regarding the technical safety point. I too have had clients suffer from not realizing that their tech has been wired to linked up with a family iCloud, and all hell has broken loose. And it's really upsetting, because you feel like your I don't know, your private thoughts have been exposed, or perhaps it's private communications to another person that's become exposed. It's a very awful situation. From a legal perspective, from a lawyer, our day-to-day working lives, we've also seen, this is slightly more on the surveillance side of things, obviously, but when a marriage is an abusive one, or a relationship's an abusive one, and it's breaking down, we're seeing more often things like tracking devices on cars. And we are seeing people's communications being interrupted, or rather tracked. The first time I ever came across this as a junior lawyer was actually when it was a male victim. The wife had gone to such extremes as to put a listening device in the gentleman's office. He was an employee. It wasn't his own business. She had actually found a way to go into work and put a listening device in his office, which is absolutely astounding. But it's amazing what people will do if they're feeling curious, or their desire to control has just gone nuts. That was my two main points there, really. Jake, you had a point that you were going to pick up on just before we go to questions.
Yeah, and actually, just to elaborate ever so slightly on something you were saying there, Sarah, about the legal aid element.
Mm-hmm.
So I used to be a legal aid practitioner in a previous life, and one of the things that was very difficult to do is for people to understand how they get legal aid. So automatically, if you're looking to protect yourself from domestic abuse, you automatically overcome the first hurdle, which is, do I have the evidence to show to the legal aid agency, the government department who decide? So, and then you just got to pass the income. However, if you've been a victim of domestic abuse and you're wanting help with your divorce, or you're arguing about your children, then you've got to have an extra piece of evidence. Now, that doesn't mean your other half, your ex other half, has to be locked up. What that can mean is, have you at the time been to see a doctor, been to see a charity? Is that charity willing to write you a very particularly worded, and there's some precedents online, letter of support? So a lot of people feel like they can't get a lawyer, they can't get legal aid because they've not told anybody, because they've not told the police. Well, the police wouldn't write you that letter anyway. What is so important is that if it's yourself, you reach out to your doctor. As Tom touched on earlier, that's confidential. You can go to your doctor, you can tell your doctor. They might not do anything with it, they may need your permission, but it's logged. What's so important is that the agencies and the charities are logging what is happening, because you may need to refer to it later and do it to a legal people. So that was just touching on Sarah's point. one thing that I wanted to touch on in relation to a practical step that you can do, or that you can tell your friends and loved ones about, is something called a non-molestation order. And the reason that I want to touch upon this is sometimes, as again Tom mentioned earlier, there's some unconscious bias, and the police may not help male victims of domestic abuse as much as females. Now, I'm not saying that the institution is corrupt. I'm not powerful enough to say that, and I don't know if that's true or not. But there is some unconscious bias in some people. Everyone has their own biases. You might come up against a particular officer that doesn't believe you as much as they believe somebody else. So what you can do in circumstances where you don't feel like the institutions that should protect you are protecting you is go to a lawyer, Stowe or any other firm, and ask them about non-molestation orders. You've got to think of it like a civil restraining order. And what you have to do is you have to make a statement and tell the court what it is that you've been through, and your solicitor will help you write this out. And the judge, provided that the judge agrees with it, will make an order that can be very, very wide in scope. It can be as tight as your other half, your ex-other half, isn't allowed to be abusive to you. Which they're not supposed to anyway, of course. Or it can be as wide as they're not allowed to communicate with you at all. They're not allowed to be 100 metres within your property. I'm not going to go into the legal minutiae of how you make the application today. I'm certainly not going to town for business today, because you can go to any firm in the country that does family law, and you should know about non-molestation orders. But if you do feel like you're not being listened to, or if your friend tells you that they have told the police and the police have sent them away, then give it a Google, look up non-molestation orders, and talk to your local firm about it.
Lovely. You've also got your domestic abuse protection notices, but you know, if you're not going to be going to police to start with, maybe the non-mol is the right kind of way. The Domestic Abuse Act in 2021 was really welcomed. It's been heavily criticised. Some people didn't feel it went far enough. And I know we've had quite a lively chat on this webinar before about it. I think in our view as practitioners, anything that highlights this situation can only be a good thing. More legislation, please. More useful legislation, please. Before we didn't have it. Yes, we need more. Any little helps. But a lot of helping people is on a day-to-day basis, as Tom says, even just helping the charities, because it gives them the resources to help other people. There is a big imbalance, and it'd be lovely if we could even things out somewhat. It's that support that gives people the courage to come and speak to us. We're not scary, we know we're not scary, but crossing our threshold is a big deal for a lot of people. It's massive, it's massive. Right, question time. Let me have a look at a question. We've got a great one here that says, I think it's really for probably for Tom here. You said that victims can feel protective regarding the abuser. How do you handle those situations where the victim is not fully resolved or consistent about wanting to separate? If it's clearly in their best interest to separate, do you advocate for that or remain neutral? Great
question.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. The how best do I approach it question. Yeah. In many respects, it's about, as I was saying earlier, about creating private settings. Okay, you being the support resource. In terms of, do you advocate or do you stay neutral? One of the fundamental things that you have to remember is, and actually I'll tell you what, before I say this, there's one stat that I actually missed, and I didn't have it, I forgot to put it on there in time, so I'm going to mention it now. Statistically, a victim will leave their abuser seven times before the final time that they leave. Seven wow. Times. Okay. The ownership for that decision has to be the victim's. So we can be the support, we can be the assurance, we can share the knowledge, we can go and find some resources and we can share that, but we can't tell or advocate for that decision to be made. It still needs to be the client's own decision. one of the things that you can do in terms of your approach in talking to your friend, the loved one, the victim, one thing that can really set the trigger off for a victim is labels. So if you're using any of the labels that I had on there earlier, if you're actually having any of them on there and you're calling them out as he or she is emotionally, psychologically, sexually abusive, and you're adding that label, what you're going to get back, again, as we kind of mentioned earlier, is the preservation, that protectiveness as you're talking about. So actually, it's more around how you're approaching that conversation, that dialogue, that reassurance dialogue and support around questioning behaviours and questioning actions, helping the victim to identify of what actually is and isn't normal, because at the moment their version of normal is what has been instilled for them, or they've been told is normal for them. You being the voice of reason to help them learn and understand, that's one of the things why I love. That's one of the things that I love about coaching. I don't give a man a fish, I teach him how to. Right? So we help them work through that process and come to those decisions. And it's much the same in this process. So try not to focus on labels, focus on behaviours and actions, helping your friend, the victim, to identify with what is and isn't right and what is wrong, and for them to be able to make that decision.
Okay, wow, we've got some good questions coming through actually. Now, Tom, you might have a different view from Jake here, but I think both of you possibly can give your perspective on this one. But could you tell us what is the rough percentage of female perpetrators who, actually we'll go with Jake first if this is okay, what is the rough percentage of female perpetrators who make false allegations to withhold or threaten to withhold access to children? I think you've got something in your caseload at the moment like that, haven't you?
I do. I think what I should say, obviously I've not been in that room. I don't know what is false and isn't false. Okay. The only people who do know what is false or isn't false are the people in that room. There's no judgment from us on either side of the coin. However, what I do notice is a lot of cases, and lots of cases that are arguing about children, come with allegations. And those numbers are much more than the numbers that Tom has been through of people who have experienced domestic abuse or people who've reported it. What we tend to find as well is that whatever that number may be, and I'm afraid I can't put a number on it because, as I said, I don't know what's false and false. But the courts will, if I was having to guess when they have to deal with any allegations, it's more than half. It's certainly more than half. There's nothing you can do to protect yourself against what somebody else is going to say. What you do have to do is remove yourself from situations that can lead to those allegations. And again, I'm just parroting what Tom was saying in his slides, but it's about not reacting. I know Tom was talking more about the friend they're leaving, the support, but it's about telling your friend that's going through the situation to walk away, to not go have that face-to-face meeting when they're in anger. And then if you do get to court, if those allegations are made, you've got something to corroborate that you didn't do the thing that they're saying you did. You've got something to corroborate that they were told at the time what the situation was. So I'm afraid that's not exactly the answer you're looking for. I'm sorry, but there isn't a figure as to what is and isn't false. But the figure as to when that figure is raised at all is very high.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think if I can just add to that in a kind of similar vein to the question I just brought up, the question, so I had it right in front of me in terms of do I have a percentage? I don't have the data per se. It is really difficult to pull that out. What I would say is that female perpetrators or the female abuser to a male victim in let's just say in a traditional heterosexual sense, it is what I have witnessed in my experience with my clients, and I work with both men and women as well as with couples, but it is a common thread, it is a common theme, where you do see that come in. It links back to the threat point that I was talking about. If you leave, you won't see the kids. And that's both emotional and psychological abuse, because you're thinking about it and you're feeling about it. It's also verbal, effectively, because it's a threat. So we're ticking 3 boxes there on a form of abuse, all within one statement. It is quite a common thing. I do have to add the caveat to Jake, much the same as any coach, therapist, lawyer, mediator, even yourself, if it's you witnessing it from afar, unless you are physically there at the time, it's really difficult to pull that data out. What I would say is I don't have a percentage or a record that I can give you. All I can tell you is that it is a common theme.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, sadly. One here for Tom, I think, really. There's a couple of questions in here, but Jake might have something to add as well. What has been your experience, Tom, on handling male victims of domestic abuse who you've been a divorce coach for? And how do we make men come out and share comfortably that they have been a victim of domestic abuse? Yeah,
great question. If I had if I had a penny for yes, unfortunately, I wish to say I didn't have to, but unfortunately, I have worked with a number of both male and female victims of various forms of domestic abuse. In terms of answering the question of how do we make men come out and come forward and making them more comfortable, a lot of that is actually with helping them restore that identity that I mentioned about earlier, helping them refine that. I don't want to kind of use too loosely words here, but that control and that power and that belief in themselves again. I have a former client who themselves is actually retraining at the moment, leaving a completely different field, worked in a very manual field. He's completely retraining in a more therapeutic method now, specifically from his own experience, and he wants to go and, like me, from his own experiences, wants to go and help and change the world and help other people. What I would say is, how do we, in terms of suggestions and ideas, how do we make people more comfortable? On a one-to-one basis, making it more acceptable. It's okay not to be okay. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to go and seek the resources. Make the scary phone call. Make the scary Google. For some people, that can be the first step of even looking at it. The things that we can do in terms of shifting, it's around trying to shift society's views as well. And everybody has various unconscious biases in terms of various different things, but we take what we learned, don't we, from watching EastEnders to whatever it might be. So it's about trying to shift that view and change that perspective on things. I would caveat that the fact of, if I would say anything good came from lockdown and COVID, it was that at least conversations were started to be had around mental health as an overall theme, as well as the subsection themes. So in terms of suggestions and ideas, kind of some things I mentioned before, it's about normalizing. It's about normalizing and making things obviously apparent that we should be having these conversations. Talk about the taboo topics and let's make them more general, so it becomes a wider topic, a safer space that people are talking about. I mentioned before about workplace. If you are in a position of authority in your business or in your workplace, and you can grab we've got the recording that goes up on YouTube, get HR or heads of people, whoever it is, to share it with your people. The more we can share, the more we can learn, and the more we can give other people that resource and that belief and that faith to step forward and speak out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Jake, do you have anything to add there?
Not very much. I think Tom's covered that very well indeed. I think from a societal point, you're spot on. It needs to be a wider conversation. It needs to be more recognised that it's not something that is okay to go through, and it is okay to not like going through it. On a daily basis, I speak to people, blokes usually, that have been through it, and they think it's just something that they have to put up with. The missus slapped me, things like that, and they just brush it off because it's how we've been raised. It's how people have been raised in decades gone by. So I think what I would add to that is less about what society can do. It's, again, what either, if you're a professional, you can do for your client, or if you're a friend or a loved one, what you can do for your loved one. It's just to give them that space, give them that opportunity. And if you feel comfortable doing it, and only if you feel comfortable doing it, share a little about yourself as well. Maybe just show that slightest don't be insincere about it, and especially if you're in a professional capacity, it's a lot harder.
Mm.
But share a little bit of vulnerability, so they know that they're talking to somebody that can trust and that can open up. So I find that helps quite a lot.
Yeah.
Some of my friends, I won't obviously share what they've been through, but they withdrew from the friendship group for a long time because they thought they had to just get on with it and man up, which is another phrase I saw in Tom's life. But absolutely not. You know, eventually you tell him about something happening in your life that you weren't too keen about, or an argument that you might have had that didn't go very well. And they think, okay, this is something I can trust, this is something I can talk to. And one to another, eventually, it'll take years rather than days. You know, we'll get there and we'll be able to talk to each other as well as the girlfriends talk to each other.
And part of that normalization is about that approach, and it kind of links to the previous question as well. Things like letting them know the assurance, always letting them know that you're here, that you're always available. Again, not necessarily using the label that we said earlier and question around behaviours, but you can still note concerns of changes of behaviour, not necessarily abuser's behaviour, but also changes in victim's behaviour. Are you okay? Because you're not quite your normal self. You're always like the lights. Normally it's really lovely, bubbly type thing, like what's going on? How are you okay? Is something you want to share? Like different ways of asking the question. The other real key thing here is I had it on the first bit as a little acronym there of are you okay? Think about, just so you don't have to answer this, but just pause for a minute, all of you, and even the people here on the screen. Think about when you see someone at work or at home or at the school gate or whatever, and someone says to you, are you okay? And you go, yeah, no, I'm fine. And you're not, because you're worried about your overdraft or something else, like something going, your car's broken down, whatever it might be, something that's not going well for you at the time. And our instant reaction is, yeah, no, I'm all right. Or I'm okay. Yeah, not bad. Ask the question a second time. You sure you're okay? You'll start to get some honesty coming out. Okay. Would you like to talk about it? Their decision. You're holding the space for them, but their decision. Would you like to talk about it? No, not really. Okay. Well, look, if you ever do, you know where I am.
That's
that,
valuable.
Just in a few sentences, that could change someone's day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely vital. I must admit, it's taken me a few years to be, I think, a better lawyer in that regard, in terms of checking in, and also pulling out gently where I can the information from people, getting them to trust you. Just like Jake said, it's a bit of vulnerability. Sometimes you've got a show to start with. Our solicitor-client relationship is always going to be a difficult one. We've got boundaries. And also we're charging. We're legally trained. We're not trained as you are in the coaching arena. We're not counsellors. And this is where the lack of signposting for male victims is a real issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, right. Are there any further questions that I've missed there? I'm not sure there is. I really feel actually that, as I said earlier, we have been opening the door to more conversations about this, which I'll be very open to having if you guys both join me again in the future. I do think perhaps a co-parenting one just for dads might be an idea. Jake, what do you think?
Absolutely, yeah, I do. I think, and this might touch upon a couple of the comments actually in the Q&A that weren't necessarily questions. There's a common theme of male frustration that things are leaning toward and do still lean towards help the women, and they feel that they're believed and they're not believed. I think, to repeat from earlier, it's about normalising it. I also think it's about persistence as well. Something I was going to mention earlier, but got sidetracked on. If you feel like one person isn't listening to you, one professional isn't listening to you, don't stick with that professional because you think, oh, I've been to see somebody, they exactly know everything about life and therefore I must stick with them forever. I've been to see one copper, they know all the law, therefore I have to give up on my claim for this assault. Persist. If you don't like the answer that you're given, if you're not comfortable, if you're not helped by the person that's speaking to you, then ask again. Ask for the supervisor, ask for the colleague, ask for a different company. Just leave.
Yeah.
Don't think if you feel like you've tried and you've not been listened to, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. Okay? It just means it's got to the right person. So as much as it's frustrating to tell your tale more than once, and it is, especially when it's a difficult conversation to have, you're not wrong just because you weren't listened to. And there will be times when you're not listened to because people do have those unconscious biases. But try again, second time, even maybe third time lucky. You'll find somebody that will listen to you, that will help you, and will know what to do.
Absolutely. Well said, Jake. Brilliant. Awesome. Right, chaps, we are at 6:45. We have run on a bit. Thank you very much for staying with us, everybody. Kate's going to be doing a follow-up email, as always, with the information in. Remember, if you're in danger, you call 999. You're going to get these slides, so there's the signposting information on there. And also, you've got our contact details. You've got Tom's contact details with the information that comes with this as well. It's been, I've really enjoyed tonight's chat. I do feel we need to do it again, and we need to widen it to some other, incorporate some other things as well. So let us know what you think, people. As I said, the content is driven by what you guys want to hear about. And if you think we've missed something or we could add to this, let us know. We'd be more than happy to help and expand on this. Big thanks to Tom, obviously. It's lovely to see you again.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Good. And Jake, thank you very much for coming along tonight. I think you missed football practice tonight for us, didn't you?
It's cold anyway, it's okay.
All right then, lovely. Thank you very much for your presence today, and thank you very much. Onwards and upwards in this subject, and let this just be the beginning of our conversations. Okay. Very much. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.